Welcome to STEM Talk.
STEM Talk.
STEM Talk.
STEM Talk.
STEM Talk. STEM Talk.
Welcome to STEM Talk, where we introduce you to fascinating people who passionately inhabit the scientific and technical frontiers of our society.
Hi, I'm your host, Don Cornegas, and joining me to introduce today's podcast is the man behind the curtain, Dr. Ken Ford, IHMC's founder and chairman of the double secret selection committee that selects all the guests who appear on STEM Talk.
Hi, Don. Great to be here.
Today, we have another Ask Me Anything episode that covers a wide range of topics. And we have questions from listeners that range from AI to protein consumption to whether grip strength is indeed a biomarker for longevity. So buckle in for another episode of Ask Me Anything.
But before we get to our listeners' questions, we have some housekeeping to take care of. First, we really appreciate all of you who have subscribed to STEM Talk, and we are especially appreciative of all the wonderful 5-star reviews.
As always, the Double Secret Selection Committee has been continually and carefully reviewing iTunes and other podcast apps for the wittiest and most lavishly praise-filled reviews to read on STEM Talk. If you hear your review read on STEM Talk, just contact us at stemtalk@ihmc.us to claim your official STEM Talk t-shirt.
Today, our winning review comes from a longtime listener who goes by the moniker Flint. The review is titled, "Thank You." It reads, "I really appreciate the episode with Joanne Manson that addressed menopause and other women's health issues. I like the way STEM Talk frequently addresses topics that don't get much attention in traditional media, at least not in a comprehensive way. Thank you for these in-depth conversations."
Well, thank you so much, Flint, and thanks to all of our STEM Talk listeners who have helped STEM Talk become such a great success.
Okay, and now on to today's Ask Me Anything episode.
STEM Talk.
STEM Talk. STEM Talk. STEM Talk.
Hi, welcome to STEM Talk. I'm your host, Don Cornegas, and joining us today is Ken Ford.
Hello, Don.
So we are here for another episode of Ask Me Anything. So I think Ken's going to get started with a question that was aimed at both of us.
Yes, indeed. A listener writes, "Here's a question for both Don and Ken. I am curious if the two of you read print books or digital books. I ask this because I do most of my reading on iPad and iPhone. It's just more convenient than print. But I've been reading a lot about how overexposure to digital content and digital devices and digital screens is rewiring our brains, which I think is kind of silly. Are digital screens truly rewiring our brains, or is it AI? Thoughts, please.
Well, I'm just going to answer from a personal perspective. I have had this debate with friends and family who insist on getting me a Kindle or, having me read from an iPad. I am a touch paper textbook person. Like, I'm always going to be a paperback person. I know that there's probably someone not happy with that answer because of potential waste, but I grew up in that area where I'd love to have a book in my hand and pen to paper. And it's just how my brain operates. So yeah, I'm a print book reader, and I have many, many print books lined up in my arsenal for future reading. So I'm always collecting them for future reading. So yeah, that's my answer.
Well, that's a good answer. And my answer is also pretty personal. It sort of depends on the context, whether I prefer traditional print books or digital representations of a book. And, these would typically be on devices like iPads, Kindles, and the such. All things being equal, I prefer conventional books, but all things are not always equal. For example, I often travel to Rome, and I bring many architectural and historical reference books, scholarly books basically, with me. They tend to be bulky and heavy. Most of them are hardback, so it's far more convenient to bring all of those materials digitally on an iPad or another device than lugging big, heavy books in one's luggage. As far as rewiring our brains, I'm not quite sure what the listener means by this, though I have also heard that term. I wish it was so simple to rewire a brain, but it's not. All kinds of activities affect our brains, some in positive ways and some in not so positive ways. Digital books, in my view, should not be a big risk, depending, of course, on what you're actually reading in the book. It's the content of the book that is the primary driver. And frankly, today's television content is much more likely to be problematic than reading a good book digitally. That is, however, not to say that I do not find the overuse of digital devices to be concerning. For example, many parents seem to use them as digital pacifiers, and a terrifyingly high percentage of vehicles contain occupants who are looking down at something they regard as more important than driving. So there are a lot of sort of issues with devices, but I think one of the less worrisome issues is a digital representation of an actual book.
I agree with everything you said, Ken. So we have a new question, a listener question for Ken. I ran across a post with a headline, "If you can hang from a bar this long, you're likely to live longer." For men, it was 60 seconds. For women, it was 30 seconds. The article was based on a paper titled Grip Strength, an Indispensable Biomarker for Older Adults. I've attached a link. The paper said that a decline in grip strength, which happens to a lot of seniors, can lead to adverse health conditions, such as heart disease, arthritis, type 2 diabetes, and certain cancers. I had no idea. What can you tell me about grip strength, and are there certain exercises or exercise equipment that you would recommend?
Well, this paper is actually a good paper, and it does seem to be true that grip strength is associated with longer life. I would emphasize that although this is interesting, it's only an association, it's not causation. Declines in grip strength over time, or having a low grip strength relative to normative data for your age and sex at any particular moment, is associated with worsened health outcomes of all kinds. But a decline in grip strength does not lead to these conditions in a causal way. This is because grip strength is exactly as the paper describes it. It's a biomarker. It's not a determinant or a causal factor. As a biomarker, grip strength appears to be an integrator of a range of aspects of physical function that are important for good health and healthy aging. In other words, poor lifestyle habits will be generally associated with lower grip strength. And of course, those poor habits are also associated with poor health outcomes. The reason we measure grip strength as a biomarker is because it is relatively easy to do. It can be done in settings with limited time, limited space, does not take much skill, and it is very reproducible. That is, there's not much error associated with the measurement. So this measure is a lot easier, for example, than measuring leg press strength, which would likely have an even stronger association with longevity and health span than grip strength. To look at it from another perspective, if a person sat all day and did no physical labor, smoked like a chimney, and ate mostly junk food, chances are they would have a grip strength on the low end for their sex and age. But if that same person took some time to practice squeezing a tennis ball 30 or 50 times a day, most likely they could improve their grip strength within a few weeks without changing a single bad habit. Almost certainly, this would not be a healthier person despite having substantially improved grip strength. So while having a higher grip strength is associated with better health outcomes, it should not be interpreted to mean that you focus on grip strength as an outcome of training. Rather, a well-designed strength training program done, 2 or 3 times a week that incorporates a range of push and pull, upper and lower body exercises would be the standard approach to addressing strength needs as we age. One consequence of which would indeed be better maintenance or even improvement in grip strength. But again, grip strength would not be the causal factor in why strength training would have benefited your health. Sadly, grip strength, like so much else, may be in decline in our society. In a 2016 paper that we discussed earlier on STEM Talk that appeared in the Journal of Hand Therapy, they reported on a study of Americans aged 20 to 34, which found millennials have significantly weaker hand grips than their counterparts did in 1985. For example, in 1985, men aged 20 to 34 had an average dominant hand grip of 121 pounds. In 2015, men of the same age had grip of only 101 pounds, and I imagine it's continued to decline since then. Another way to think about this is that in a single generation, it appears that young men are significantly weaker than their fathers at the same age. One does not normally see a decline of this magnitude in such a short time frame. Women also showed a slight decrease, but the decline in men was much more pronounced. Now, in my view, this is a sad state of affairs, and is an amazing decline this quickly. Several factors have been suggested. to account for this. One suggestion was increasingly sedentary lifestyles with lower levels of manual labor and physical activity in almost everyone's daily routine. So much work now is essentially computer-mediated. Also, the substantial decline that we see in testosterone levels in men would seem a likely culprit. Probably it's a combination of two or more factors, but those are two that jump right to the top of the list.
It's a great answer, Ken. So we have another question for Ken. A listener writes, I enjoyed the Frank Butler interview. I was intrigued by the discussion that Ken and Frank had about ketamine as a treatment for depression. I wanted to raise my hand and interrupt you guys and ask about the FDA-approved drug esketamine, which is derived from ketamine and has been used for years to treat depression. What do you know about esketamine, and why does it have the FDA's stamp of approval and ketamine doesn't?
Esketamine, also known as Spravato, and ketamine are very closely related, but they are distinct compounds with some key differences in their properties, uses, and effects. To start, they have very different chemical structures. Without going into the technical specifics, esketamine is about twice as potent. Thus, lower doses can achieve the same clinical effects as ketamine. Ketamine, as the listener probably knows, is widely used in human and veterinary medicine for its anesthetic properties. Esketamine is also used for anesthesia, but really mostly in Europe. Esketamine is specifically FDA approved in the United States for treatment-resistant depression and major depressive disorder with acute suicidal ideation or behavior. It's typically administered as a nasal spray. This simplifies dosing for psychiatric use. Regular ketamine is used off-label for very similar purposes, often via intravenous infusion or intranasal administration, but lacks specific FDA approval for depression. It is important to remember that 80% of all medications are actually prescribed off-label, including ketamine, and this is absolutely a common and accepted practice in the medical field. Another significant difference is patent status. Once a drug like ketamine goes off patent, generic manufacturers can produce and sell it, leading to greatly increased competition and lower prices. These lower prices reduce the profit margin for any company wanting to market it for new uses. With ketamine being off patent, there's much less incentive to fund really expensive new research unless patentable applications or new formulations, such as a new delivery method or a combination with another drug, could be developed. This is the main reason esketamine is FDA approved and regular ketamine is off-label.
Thank you, Ken. And so next, a listener asked Ken about a paper published in 2023 in the Journal of Age and Aging under the title, Higher Dietary Protein Intake is Associated with Sarcopenia in Older British Twins. Given what I have heard in previous episodes of STEM Talk, this seems counterintuitive.
Oh my. In my view, this is yet another paper that should never have been published. But today, this kind of thing has really become all too common. In fact, this paper seems so surprising that I consulted with several colleagues in case I was somehow missing a subtlety had escaped me in some way. I talked to several, including Brendan Egan and others. Brendan has been on STEM Talk, and I recommend his episodes. Protein has become, for some reason, a primary target for some nutrition researchers. I suspect a hidden agenda. It's hard to know for sure what motivates people. The one-line conclusion of the study was that, and I quote, high protein intake is associated with sarcopenia in a cohort of healthy older twins. I hate wasting time on this ridiculous paper, but it has attracted lots of attention, which frankly may have been the primary goal of the authors. In the introduction, the authors acknowledged that protein consumption in seniors has been heavily studied elsewhere, and yet they apparently feel justified in claiming that their dubious and contrary results should guide nutrition policy. Vast quantities of data disagree with this result. So my best guess is that either their food frequency questionnaire data are truly terrible, or this is some kind of reverse causation. For instance, already sarcopenic older individuals are often told to increase protein intake. The argument for the poor food frequency questionnaire data is that I cannot think of a single population of average older individuals where essentially a third of them are eating more than 1.3 grams per kilogram of protein per day. That seems entirely spurious to me, and I honestly believe there's no mechanism that would explain the results otherwise. In previous episodes of STEM Talk, We have extensively discussed the importance of protein, particularly for older populations, which tend to underconsume it. The topic of protein in aging adults has already been tested numerous times across various populations, and muscle loss has never once been associated with higher protein consumption. I will say that another apparently anomalous finding is that in their study, physical activity doesn't differ between the sarcopenic and the non-sarcopenic groups. So according to the authors, muscle mass is not related to physical activity, which is of course ridiculous. A rather extreme but obvious counterexample is that even a short hospital stay involving bed rest will certainly diminish muscle mass. In some data, one does find no association between physical activity and muscle mass, not because physical activity is not beneficial to muscle, but that it is common for those in this cohort having more muscle mass are also those who are just larger and frankly unhealthier in general. This is a huge confounder for any potential benefit of muscle mass in studies like this. It really depends on how and why you gained or maintained your muscle. And for many obese people, it is not through physical exercise. This is a paper that frankly is likely to do much more harm than good. I guess to summarize, their policy recommendation might be to reduce both protein and exercise to avoid sarcopenia.
Great answer, Ken. And coming from, a lot of experience and research that you've done as well. So that's fantastic. So, okay, this is the longest question we have for the day, but it's a good one. So just hang on. The listener writes, Whisper is a transcription product from OpenAI. OpenAI recommends that people not use Whisper in high-risk domains, and that's in quotes. But according to a story by the Associated Press, medical centers are flocking to use the tool to transcribe physician consultations. One would think that medical transcription would qualify as a quote-unquote high-risk domain, but apparently not. The AP article is titled, Researchers Say an AI-Powered Transcription Tool Used in Hospitals Invents Things No One Ever Said. The story details a study that shows Whisper frequently hallucinates, and not just garbling a few words or phrases. Below are examples from the story of Whisper's hallucinations. In an example of a transcription error, a speaker said, the boy was going to, I'm not sure exactly, take the umbrella. But the transcription software added, he took a big piece of a cross, a teeny small piece. I'm sure he didn't have a terror knife, so he killed a number of people. In a second example of erroneous transcription, Whisper invented a non-existent medication called hyperactivated antibiotics. So my question is, and I apologize for taking so long to get to my question, is there a guidance from the expert augmented intelligence and machine learning communities about how tools like Whisper should be taken up in the marketplace to navigate what feels like a Wild West time in the proliferation of tools like Whisper?
That's both a long but also interesting and important question for society as a whole. We'll have to wrestle with this issue and find some suitable path forward. Tools such as Whisper, based on large language models, and it's not just Whisper, it's essentially all of them that work in this fashion, should not be used in domains where errors could lead to serious consequences. We have discussed so-called hallucinations previously on STEM Talk, particularly on some earlier Ask Me Anything episodes. The use of the term hallucinate, as I have previously mentioned, is unfortunate and seems part of a general effort to inappropriately anthropomorphize and humanize these systems. The term hallucination might seem to attribute a certain complexity or sophistication to the errors made by AI language models, perhaps implying that these models generate text with a degree of intentionality or awareness. However, in reality, the mistakes made by these models are typically due to the fundamental way in which they operate. These errors occur because large language models generate text by predicting the next likely words or phrases based on patterns learned from training data. In the domain of medical transcription, no medical institution would knowingly use a human to take transcriptions if that particular human was well known to hallucinate extensively at work, and sometimes include the hallucinations in his or her report. Large language models can be thought of as mimicking human dialogue at a sometimes convincing but often superficial level, always without understanding. Emily Bender, a linguist at the University of Washington, has referred to them, and I think this is beautiful, as stochastic parrots.
It's fantastic. I really like that term, and I'm going to use that for other things as well.
STEM Talk is an educational service of the Florida Institute for Human and Machine Cognition, a not-for-profit research organization investigating a broad range of topics aimed at understanding and extending human cognition, locomotion, health span, resilience, and performance.
So, Ken, we actually have another AI question, which seems to fit nicely into our previous discussion. So, a listener asks you about a series of articles by Kevin Roose appearing in the New York Times that seems rather fantastical and makes claims such as that with current AI, there is no reason to learn to code, as AI will be doing all the work of programmers, and that it is time for a serious discussion about how and when we humans will grant AI specific rights as a conscious or sentient intelligence. The listener asks where Ken stands on these topics.
Well, even by the currently subterranean standards of the New York Times, a former newspaper, Kevin Roose's columns have reached a new low with his musings about whether AI systems are conscious or whether they should have rights of some interesting kinds, perhaps making it morally wrong to speak rudely to it, or worse, to unplug it. The article was published in April, so naturally I thought it might be an April Fool's joke. But there are lots of such articles that he publishes. He also has written about AI essentially ending the need, as the listener mentioned, for expert computer programmers. Just have a good idea and tell the AI what you want, and voila, there is your program. This, of course, is nonsense and reflects that Mr. Rose knows little about what programmers actually do. Perhaps uniquely among technical and scientific topics, people with zero scientific expertise or technical training are heavily engaged in writing articles about AI. We do not see English majors writing columns about physics, for example, but this is exactly what we have here.
Okay, Ken. So that was a fantastic answer. And now you have another AI-based question. So this one is for you. The National Academy of Medicine issued a report recently, Generative Artificial Intelligence in Health and Medicine, Opportunities and Responsibilities for Transformative Innovation. It notes that large language models, powered by advances in generative AI and natural language processing, hold huge promise for patient care and healthcare system workflows overall, and risks, of course. So 2 areas the report says are possible near-term applications for large language models are patient education and synthesizing information of electronic medical records. So the listener would like to know if Ken concurs with this and if he thinks there are other near-term possible applications that most people could expect to see in, say, the next 1 to 5 years as part of their new doctor visit.
Well, patient education might actually be a good application for carefully tuned and tested large language models. I'm not sure about synthesizing information of electronic medical records, though. I think that would depend very much on the specific application and on the consequences of error. It is important to note that this discussion is entirely and only in regard to large language models. There are many other important AI technologies already in very widespread application in medicine, such as pattern recognition in the context of radiology. Although large language models have captured the public imagination, there is so much more to AI than just chatbots. But the question was around large language models, so I answered in that fashion.
Great answer, Ken. As a follow-up question, the report notes that the concept of the digital twin, which is a computational representation of a patient or an individual disease, could help speed up virtual experiments or subgroup analysis of investigational agents that would be risky to conduct on real people. So, Ken, can you share more about this concept of the digital twin in medicine, powered potentially by machine learning methods to tailor or advance patient care?
Yes, the term digital twin is increasingly used in medicine to describe personalized computational models meant to simulate aspects of a patient's biology. But the phrase can be misleading. It suggests a level of completeness and fidelity that today's models cannot deliver. A model can be understood as a simplified representation of reality. For example, we can think of a map as a model of sorts. Alfred Kurbitsky's famous insight that the map is not the territory applies directly to digital twins in medicine. A digital twin, no matter how sophisticated, is a model, a constructed abstraction of the real living organism. It can highlight certain features, it can simulate dynamics, it can offer predictive insight, but it remains a representation, not the thing itself. A simulation of a hurricane is not a hurricane. George Box's adage, all models are wrong, but some are useful, pairs perfectly with Korzybinski's the map is not the territory. Together they provide a powerful philosophical framework for thinking about digital twins in medicine. Unlike a real biological twin, a digital twin reflects only selected data shaped by assumptions, simplifications, and often, almost always, an incomplete understanding of complex biological systems. Relying too heavily on such models, especially in high-stakes decisions like drug trials or treatment planning, risks false confidence and unforeseen harm. The term digital twin originated in engineering and computer science, where a digital twin of, say, a jet engine could closely mirror its physical counterpart structure and function under known conditions. That made perfect sense. Transferring that concept to biomedicine involves far greater uncertainty and potential risk if not used appropriately. Looking forward, clarity in new technology will be crucial, not just for managing expectations, but for maintaining trust in how these tools are used to inform decisions.
Ken, in the diving decompression world, that quote about models is used often, are always wrong,
Yep.
sometimes useful.
It's so true, right?
Yep.
And people forget that these digital twins, the word twin is very misleading.
So, Ken, one more question. This does not have to do with AI.
Yay!
Yay. So, this past December, a paper was published in the Journal of Nutrition, Health, and Aging titled Effects of Vitamin D3, Omega-3 Fatty Acids, and a Simple Home Exercise Program on Change in Physical Activity Among Generally Healthy and Active Older Adults. The authors reported that among generally healthy, active, and largely vitamin D3 replete adults aged 70 years and older, that vitamin D supplementation had a detrimental effect on physical function and activity. So, Ken, do you have thoughts on this paper?
Oh, yes. This paper reflects a shockingly poor study design and has unfortunately caused consternation as some media and health websites are now touting that older folks should avoid vitamin D supplementation to prevent loss of physical activity and function. This same paper also reported that an at-home exercise intervention had no effect on self-reported physical function or self-reported activity and objectively measured physical function. However, their exercise intervention was such that, in my view, it barely counts as exercise, and the outcome is self-reported physical activity. And we all know that self-reported anything is not very useful. Of course, if you don't actually give people proper exercise, their function will not improve, and this was hardly exercise at all. But returning to vitamin D supplementation, there is no plausible mechanism for why vitamin D supplementation would have a detrimental effect on physical activity. Also, this study, like so many other vitamin D studies, is based on dosing, for example, 2,000 IUs. It's not based on the circulating level of vitamin D in someone's blood measured by a blood test, and everybody reacts differently to dosing of vitamin D. It is also worth noting that the subjects in this study were not deficient in vitamin D. In any case, I suggest ignoring this study.
Final recommendation.
Yep.
Right.
I wish I had ignored it. Here's a question that came for both of us. A listener says, I keep hearing about settled science. You hear this more and more. How does some science get to be called settled?
That's a great question. Just from my perspective and from what we know about settled, quote unquote, settled science, it's essentially acknowledged and accepted by experts in the field with minimal argument against whatever that science is or perspective is, and also has substantial evidence to support, but I know that it's not the end all be all. And that's why in science, it is never the end all be all. That's why we continue to conduct science. So Ken, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, there's been all kinds of settled science.
Quote unquote, yes.
Even including, whether the planets orbit the Earth or whether the Earth is flat. We've had lots of settled science, and in the last few years, we've seen a lot of settled science. In a nutshell, this increasingly common term, settled science, often indicates an agenda that is anything but scientific. As Dawn noted, science does not proceed by consensus. If what is referred to as settled science is not open to new evidence and revision, then it's not science at all, but rather dogma, which robustly resists revision and critical examination. Science is about asking the skeptical question, which might nullify a popular hypothesis. But in today's bizarre, narrative-driven world, rather than nullifying hypotheses, we nullify people. A listener asks if Dawn or Ken have a favorite healthy snack.
So, Ken, I do have a favorite healthy snack, and probably for the last 7 or 8 years, I've been going to this one because of your influence, also because our friend Tony Sapphire actually introduced it to me.
What a great guy.
Yeah, great guy, great human. So Greek yogurt, so full-fat Greek yogurt, and some berries, fresh berries, and maybe some nuts on top, and that's it. Nothing super fancy, but it really hits the bill when I need it.
Well, that's a good one.
Yeah.
And I guess my favorite healthy snack, and I don't know, I might be fickle. If you ask me again in 5 years, I might have a different one. I don't know. I kind of like this one. I really enjoy Maui Nui venison sticks. And I like them because they're convenient. I'm usually very busy, and each provide 10 grams of protein from wild harvested Hawaii axis deer. And this is an overpopulated deer, and there's a program there to handle this, and they produce them solely from that kind of deer. So I really like those, and they come in peppered or plain, a variety of options. And they have one that is sort of keto friendly, and that's the one I like best. 10 grams in a pop, it's good. I like it. If I eat too many of them, I guess I'll get sarcopenia.
There you go. All right, Ken, I have one more question for you. So a listener writes, I understand that Dr. Ford is a huge fan of blood flow restriction training, and I'm curious which blood flow restriction devices Dr. Ford recommends.
Well, the listener's right. I do like it very much. I'll make this a brief answer, as we have extensively discussed blood flow restriction training in previous STEM Talk episodes. In particular, I'd like to point out episode 34 with Jim Stray Gunderson, who was really a pioneer of blood flow restriction training and just a wonderful person, and episode 161 with his son, Sten Stray Gunderson, who's really taken up the mantle. Personally, I use both the Be Strong system and also Katsu. If I had to recommend just one, considering the price and ease of use, I guess it would be Be Strong. But I like them both, and I use them both. A listener writes, I've read several recent articles in the news about a new subsea technology company called Deep, and Dawn is working with them. Can she tell us more about this company and what her role is with Deep? It sounds fascinating and right up Dawn's alley, given her diving and research backgrounds.
Yeah, thank you for asking, and super happy to talk about Deep. Hopefully we can do a future STEM talk around some of the research that we're doing with Deep. So I joined Deep as Director of Scientific Research about a year ago, and we are an organization that's focused on bringing humans back to undersea and making humans aquatic. So that includes building subsea human-occupied habitats. The last ones were built in the 1980s, so there's a lot of technology to integrate now with newer habitats. And also developing out the dive training and the biomedical research that's required to keep people healthy and working to the best of their ability in those environments. So we're really excited to be coming to the U.S. just specifically. We're UK based and UK started, but we have a U.S. entity that we just started up, and we are going to be putting our first habitats in the water this summer, so summer of 2025. And yeah, just really excited to get things spun up. And it's a great opportunity for me to combine that operational diving background and all the different areas of research that I've either participated in or that my colleagues work in, including folks at IHMC. So anywhere from human performance and health in extreme environments, human-machine teaming, marine technology, autonomous systems. There's a whole variety of research that we get to tackle. And I'm really excited to also collaborate with IHMC researchers in that space moving forward.
That's really interesting, and I think it's something for everyone to keep an eye on. It's a very, very interesting project.
Thank you, Ken. I really appreciate it. So, Ken, a little birdie told me that you recently gave an excellent commencement address to the 2025 graduating class at the University of West Florida. Is that correct?
Well, I don't know if it was excellent, but I did give a speech.
Well, I just happened to have an audio of your speech, and I thought our listeners might find it interesting. It has some excellent advice, not only for graduating seniors, but for any of our listeners as well. Do you mind if we play it?
No, it seems an odd coincidence that you just happen to have a copy, but yes, you may play it, and the listeners can take comfort in knowing that it's exceptionally brief.
There you go. Okay, well, here it goes.
Dr. Ford has received many awards and honors, including the Dr. Honoris Causa from the University of Bordeaux in 2005 and the 2008 Robert Inglemore Memorial Award for his work in artificial intelligence. In 2012, Tulane University named him its outstanding alumnus in the School of Science and Engineering. In 2015, the Association for the Advancement of Artificial Intelligence named Dr. Ford the recipient of the 2015 Distinguished Service Award. In 2017, Dr. Ford was inducted into the Florida Inventors Hall of Fame. Help me welcome Dr. Ken Ford.
Well, thank you, President Saunders, for that exceptionally kind introduction. It is an honor to be here on this wonderful day with the faculty, families, guests, and most especially, of course, the graduates. Nearly 25 years ago, educator and cultural critic Neil Postman was invited to give a graduation talk at Brigham Young University, and he took his task seriously. He thought deeply about what comprises a suitable graduation speech. Postman's postulate, I like to call it, which he generously shared with the world, was that the most important attribute of a tolerable graduation talk is brevity. I will follow in his learned footsteps in this regard. There are exactly 50 sentences in my speech, 5 of which you have just heard. So take comfort in knowing that this speech is already more than 10% over. I will give you a little advice today, but just a little. In 2017, I was elected to membership in the Florida Inventors Hall of Fame, and naturally, they requested the new inductees to make some brief comments about their careers and most importantly, about their various inventions. It was during my preparation for this induction ceremony when I realized that really we're all inventors, and whatever else we may invent in our lives, we are each our own most important invention. So be sure that you invent someone you like, because you will be spending a lot of time with that person. People talk a lot about young people, quote, finding themselves. I have a friend that told me his daughter went to Europe to find herself. I wonder where she looked. This presumes that we are lost and that people are lost. One cannot find themselves. One rather invents themselves. We often hear the adage that we are all the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Now, I have no idea if this is true, and I'm somewhat dubious of this claim. However, it should be an absolutely terrifying concept for people who watch a lot of television. It is important to appreciate that our first self-invention does not have to be our last. Personally, I have been a cook, an athlete, a rock and roll promoter, a military man, a professor, a researcher, a NASA executive, and a CEO. And I may have 1 or 2 more inventions left. But our most important invention, no matter what you invent, is yourself. And I think we should all periodically think about that and reinvent ourselves in ways large and small. I invite you now to rejoice in the extreme unlikelihood and fragility of your own existence. When you consider the odds of you being here in your exact form, it is nothing short of miraculous. Consider the countless generations of your ancestors, each one needing to find a mate and pass on their genes, eventually leading to you. You are, in a very real sense, a rare and precious thread woven into the fabric of life. So celebrate the miracle of your own existence and live with joy and intention. And although, as I say, we should celebrate the miracle of our existence, we should also remember that we will all be dead soon. As Steve Jobs stressed in his 2005 Stanford graduation talk, we live relatively brief lives. Life presents each one of us with a series of choices and decisions. Some are very consequential. And remembering life's finite nature can be an invaluable tool to helping us make good choices. Nearly 2,000 years ago, Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, often reflected on the impermanence of life and the importance of focusing on what truly matters. You are not dead yet, so don't nibble at life's edges. This is not a dress rehearsal. We don't get do-overs. Envision yourself living a life that you love. Be bold, dare greatly. As Les Brown once said, shoot for the moon. And even if you miss, you'll land among the stars. Avoid cynicism. To quote Stephen Colbert, cynicism masquerades as wisdom, but it's the furthest thing from it. Because cynicism is a self-imposed blindness, a rejection of the world, because we fear it might hurt us or disappoint us. Skepticism is healthy. Cynicism is not. Unfortunately, cynicism is fashionable in some circles. In fact, it is near epidemic among the learned. Throughout your life, you will meet many cynics, but remember, they only act that way because they are frightened. Human progress has not been the result of sneering cynics, but rather of visionaries and the courageous who never accepted that they were powerless to change the world for better. Take your life seriously and make it count for something. In closing, let me say that the University of West Florida has played a major role in my life, and I am exceptionally pleased and grateful to have received an honorary doctorate from my alma mater. As Jack Benny once said, I don't deserve this award, but I have arthritis and I don't deserve that either. Well, as I promised, that was my 49th sentence, so only one left. Thank you and congratulations to the class of 2025.
So, Ken, that was absolutely a great commencement address.
Thanks, Don. Except for the screaming children, I thought the speech went well and the audience was attentive and polite.
I think they were just cheering you on, Ken. So thank you to our listeners for another Ask Me Anything episode.
Yes, the questions continue to be interesting and provocative, and please keep them coming.
STEM Talk. STEM Talk.
STEM Talk. STEM Talk.
Okay, Ken, so how much do you want to bet that for our next Ask Me Anything episode, someone asks whether podcasts are rewriting for our brains? Just putting it out there.
Well, actually, that's a pretty good question, Don, and I can't wait to answer it in our next Ask Me Anything episode. Of course, maybe no one will ask that. If podcasts do rewire our brains, I especially recommend STEM Talk for the job.
I concur. This is Dawn Carnegie signing off for now.
And this is Ken Ford saying goodbye until we meet again on STEM Talk.
Thank you for listening to STEM Talk. We want this podcast to be discovered by others, so please take a minute to go to iTunes to rate the podcast and perhaps even write a review. More information about this and other episodes can be found at our website, stemtalk.us. There, you can also find more information about the guests we interview.